He gave his son everything he had. Everything. But nothing could have prepared him for what was waiting at his own front door. An eviction notice. His name at the top wasn't his own son's Todd. It was his son's signature ordering him out. He couldn't even look his father in the eye. Because deep down, he already knew what he had done. 29 years of sacrifice, reduced to a signature on a piece of paper. But this father wasn't done yet. Not even close. He raised his son to believe the world owed him nothing. Now, it was time for his son to learn the same lesson, the hard way.
If you have ever given everything you had to someone you loved, only to be thrown away like garbage once you were no longer useful, this story will break your heart and then put it back together. Stay until the end, because what this father discovers about his own son will shock you. And if stories like this move you, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel, because we tell these true-to-life stories every single week and you will not want to miss what comes next. My name is Walter Reeves, and for 31 years I believed that love was measured in sacrifice. I was wrong. Love is measured in what people do when they think no one is watching. And what my son did to me on a rainy Tuesday morning changed everything I thought I knew about the boy I raised alone. It started the way most tragedies start, quietly, almost gently, disguised as an ordinary day. I was 58 years old, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold in my hands when I heard the knock at the door. 3 sharp knocks. Not the knock of a neighbor, not the knock of a friend. The knock of someone who had rehearsed exactly how hard to hit the wood. I opened the door expecting a delivery man. Instead, I found a stranger in a gray suit holding a manila envelope, and behind him, standing at the curb beside a car I did not recognize, was my son, Daniel. He did not come to the door himself. He stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, refusing to look at me directly. "Mr. Reeves?" the stranger asked. "Walter Reeves." "That's me," I said, my chest already tightening, some ancient animal part of my brain sensing danger before my mind could catch up. "I'm serving you this on behalf of the property owner." He held out the envelope. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Ah! I laughed. I actually laughed because for a moment I thought it was some kind of mistake, some clerical error, some mix-up with an address. This was my house. I had lived in this house for 26 years. I had built the back porch with my own hands the summer Daniel turned 7. I had painted his bedroom blue because he loved the ocean, even though we lived 400 miles from any coast. This was not a house that could be taken from me. This was the only thing in the world that was truly mine. "There's been some mistake," I said. "I own this house." The man in the gray suit shook his head slowly, the way people do when they have delivered this same speech 100 times before and have learned not to feel anything about it anymore. "According to our records, the property was transferred to a new owner 4 months ago. Daniel Reeves. He's exercising his right as the legal owner to reclaim the property for personal use." I looked past the stranger's shoulder, past the hedges I had trimmed every summer, to the boy standing by the car. My boy, my only child. The one I had raised alone since he was 4 years old. Since the night his mother packed one suitcase and never came back. Since I had learned to braid hair I didn't know how to braid and cook meals from recipe cards with handwriting I didn't recognize because they were his grandmother's. Or since I had worked 2 jobs so he would never once feel the absence of a mother as a hole he could not fill with anything else. "Daniel," I called out. My voice cracked in a way I was not prepared for. "Daniel, what is this?" He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before in 29 years of being his father. Not anger, not even guilt. Something colder, something that looked almost like relief, like a man setting down a heavy bag he had been carrying for too long. "It's just business, Dad," he said. "You'll figure something out. You always do." Then he got in the car, and the car pulled away, and I stood on the porch of the house I built my life around, holding an eviction notice with my own son's name printed at the top of it. To understand how a father ends up here, you have to go back to the beginning, because nothing about this story makes sense without knowing what came before it. Daniel's mother, Carol, left when he was 4. I remember the exact date because it was 2 days before his birthday, and I remember thinking in the middle of my own devastation, that I had to hold myself together long enough to make sure his 4th birthday still had cake and balloons and a magician who did card tricks, because a 4-year-old should not know that the day his mother left is also the day before the day he turns 4. I built him a fortress of ordinary happiness on top of the rubble of my own heart, and I did that every single day for the next 14 years. I worked as a foreman at a manufacturing plant during the day and picked up shifts driving a delivery truck at night. I slept 4 hours most nights, and I never once told Daniel that I was tired, because tired was not a luxury a single father got to have out loud. I coached his little league team even though I had never played baseball myself, and had to learn the rules from a library book the week before the season started. I sat in the front row of every school play, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference, and I made sure that no other child in that town could say their father showed up more than mine did when Daniel was 16 and wanted to start a lawn care business with his friends. I bought him his first mower with money I'd been saving for a new furnace, and I told myself the old furnace had one more winter left in it, and I was right, but barely. When he wanted to go to college for business, out of state, at a school we could not really afford, I took out a second mortgage on this very house, the house that would one day carry his name instead of mine, and I never once made him feel the weight of that debt. I wanted him to walk into that university with his shoulders back, believing the world owed him nothing and gave him everything anyway, because that is the gift I never had and the gift I was determined to give him. He graduated with honors. I sat in the stands and cried the way only fathers who have done it all alone truly understand crying. Not sadness, not exactly joy, but something closer to release, like finally exhaling a breath you had been holding for 18 years. After college, Daniel came home with a girlfriend named Vanessa. She was polished in a way that made me nervous from the very first dinner, the kind of polish that comes from calculation rather than comfort. She complimented my house the way a realtor compliments a property before making an offer, walking through each room with her eyes doing arithmetic I could not yet read. She asked me questions about the house's square footage, about the property lines, about whether I had ever considered renovating or selling. I thought she was simply curious. I did not yet understand that curiosity in some people is just reconnaissance wearing a friendly face. Within a year, Daniel told me he and Vanessa were starting a business together, a property investment company, buying and renovating homes to resell. He asked me for a loan to get it started. I gave him almost everything I had left in savings, because that is what fathers do, and because some small, foolish, hopeful part of me believed that if I gave enough, if I sacrificed enough, my son would love me not out of obligation, but out of genuine, unbreakable devotion. I did not know at the time that 4 months before that knock on my door, Daniel had come to me with paperwork he described as estate planning, something to protect the house from taxes and complications if anything ever happened to me. He told me it would be simpler, cleaner, if the house was in his name, with an informal agreement, nothing in writing, just a father and son handshake, that I would live there for the rest of my life, no matter what. I signed the papers without a lawyer, because he was my son, and you do not hire a lawyer to protect yourself from your own child. That is the exact sentence I said to myself the night I signed those documents at my own kitchen table, the same table where I later held that eviction notice with hands that would not stop shaking. For a while I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Vanessa was pressuring him. Maybe the business was in trouble and he needed the house as collateral for some loan, something temporary, something he would explain to me once the panic settled and he could look me in the eye again. I told myself this while I drove to my sister's house that first night, unable to sleep in a home I no longer legally owned, staring at the ceiling of her guest room and trying to reconcile the boy I raised with the man who had just orchestrated my removal from my own life. Grief has stages, but betrayal has its own separate anatomy. First comes the disbelief, the desperate search for an innocent explanation. Then comes the bargaining, the phone calls that go unanswered, the text messages typed and deleted a dozen times before finally being sent, softened, apologetic, as if I was the one who needed to apologize for existing inconveniently in my own son's life. Then comes something darker, something I am not proud of but will not pretend I did not feel. The slow, cold arrival of a question that would not leave me alone. Why? Not why did he do this? I could construct 100 theories for why. What consumed me instead was a colder, more specific question. What exactly had happened in those 4 months between the estate planning conversation and the knock on my door, and who had orchestrated it? Because here's the thing about raising a child alone for 18 years. You learn to read them the way sailors read weather. And I knew with a certainty that kept me awake at 3 a.m. in my sister's guest room that my son did not have the coldness in him to do this alone. Someone had built that coldness for him, piece by piece, the way you build anything else, patiently, deliberately, with a blueprint. I decided, somewhere around the second week of sleeping on my sister's pull-out couch, that I was done being the man who simply absorbed pain and called it fatherly patience. I was going to find out exactly what had happened to my house, my savings, and my son. Not out of anger alone, though there was plenty of that. Out of something closer to duty. The same duty that had made me learn to braid hair and read bedtime stories in a voice that did not crack even when everything inside me was breaking. If Daniel had been manipulated into becoming a man capable of evicting his own father, then somewhere in this story was a version of my son still worth saving. And if he had not been manipulated, if this coldness had simply always lived in him waiting for permission, then I needed to know that too. Because a man deserves to know the truth about his own child, no matter how much it costs him. My nephew, Marcus, worked in property records at the county office. And it was Marcus who first showed me the paper trail that Daniel probably assumed no one would ever bother to follow. The house had been transferred into Daniel's name, yes, but 3 weeks after that transfer, a lien had been placed on the property. Not by Daniel, but by a lending company connected to Vanessa's family. The investment business Daniel had poured my savings into was not simply struggling. It had never functioned as an actual business at all. It existed on paper, filed with the state, listing an address and a logo and nothing else. No clients, no properties purchased, no renovations completed. It was, as far as Marcus and I could determine from public records alone, a shell built for exactly one purpose: to become collateral for a private loan that Vanessa's family had extended to cover debts from an entirely different venture, one that had already failed spectacularly the previous year. My son had not evicted me because he needed a house to live in. My son had evicted me because my house, the one I had spent 26 years paying for, the one with the porch I built and the blue bedroom walls, was now the only asset standing between Vanessa's family and a debt collapse that would have taken down everything they owned. They needed it liquid. They needed it sold. And Daniel, whether out of love for Vanessa, fear of losing her, or something far colder that I was not yet ready to name, had signed the paperwork that put his own father's home on the market to make that happen. I sat with that information for 3 days before I did anything with it. I wanted to be honest about what those 3 days felt like, because I think a lot of people who have been betrayed by someone they loved will recognize this feeling. It is not simply anger. It is grief wearing anger's clothes. I grieved the version of my son I thought I had raised. I grieved every sacrifice I had made, wondering now if it had built a man capable of gratitude or simply a man skilled at taking. And underneath all of it, quietly, persistently, curiosity kept gnawing at me, not just about the money, but about him. Who was my son, really, when he was not performing the role of grateful child in front of me? What had he told himself, in the privacy of his own conscience, to make this feel like something other than betrayal? I decided the only way to get an honest answer was to stop being predictable. For 29 years, Daniel had known exactly what his father would do in any situation: forgive, absorb, sacrifice, wait patiently for an apology that eventually came, even if it took months. This time, I did something different. I hired a lawyer, a real one, sharp and unsentimental. A woman named Renata Cole, who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet family fraud, and instead of confronting Daniel with fury, I confronted him with silence and paperwork of my own. Renata discovered something that changed the entire shape of this story. The estate planning transfer Daniel had convinced me to sign was legally void, not because of any clever loophole, but because of something far simpler and far sadder. The notary who had stamped the document did not exist. There was no licensed notary registered under that name in the entire state. The signature had been forged on a seal, likely by whoever had drafted the paperwork for Daniel in the first place, and Renata was almost certain, based on the handwriting and the firm's letterhead, that it traced back to a small, obscure legal office that had previously done work for Vanessa's family. My son had not simply been talked into a bad decision. He had been used as an unwitting instrument, or a willing one, and even now, even after everything, I still hoped somewhere in the wounded corner of my heart that refused to fully harden that it was the former. I did not go to Daniel first. I went to the courthouse. Renata filed to have the transfer voided on grounds of fraud, and because the notarization was demonstrably fabricated, the case moved faster than either of us expected. Within 6 weeks, a judge restored the deed to my name. The eviction notice that had once felt like the end of my life became, in the eyes of the law, a document built on a lie, legally meaningless, though the pain it had caused me was very real and would not be undone by any ruling. It was after the judge's decision, not before, that I finally called Daniel. He did not know yet that the transfer had been voided. He answered the phone with the wary caution of a man who has been avoiding a call for weeks and finally run out of excuses. "Dad," he said. And for the first time since the eviction notice, I heard something in his voice that sounded less like the cold stranger on the curb and more like the boy who used to call me from the school payphone when he skinned his knee at recess, before we could afford a cell phone for him. "I know what happened," I said, not with anger. I had promised myself I would not lead with anger because anger closes doors and I needed this door open, at least for a little while longer. I know about the loan. I know about the shell company. I know the transfer was built on a forged notarization, and I know the judge has already restored the house to my name. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I wondered if he had hung up. "I didn't know about the notary," he finally said, and his voice had gone thin, almost childlike. "I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know that part. Vanessa's uncle handled the paperwork. I thought it was real." "But you knew about the loan," I said. "You knew my house was collateral for a debt that had nothing to do with me." Another silence. This one was the answer. "I was scared," he said finally. "Her family was going to lose everything, and she said if I didn't help she was going to leave, and He stopped. "I told myself you had years left in that house either way, and that I'd fix it before you ever noticed anything was wrong. I told myself a lot of things, Dad. None of them were good enough. I know that now. I want to tell you that in that moment, I forgave him instantly and completely, because that is the kind of ending people want from a story like this. But the truth is more complicated, and I think the complicated truth is more useful to anyone listening who has lived through something similar. I did not forgive him in that phone call. I told him the house was mine again, legally and permanently, and that I loved him because I did. Because 18 years of braided hair and Little League practices and second mortgages do not simply evaporate the moment you discover your child's weakness has a price tag, but that love and trust are not the same currency, and he had spent the second one completely. I told him he was welcome to call me. I told him he was welcome to visit. I told him that if he ever wanted to earn his way back into the kind of relationship we used to have, he could start by ending things with Vanessa and her family's schemes, and getting himself a lawyer who could untangle him from the fraud he had unknowingly become an accomplice to, because forged notarizations are not just my problem. They could very easily become his. He did eventually do exactly that. It took him 4 more months, and it cost him nearly everything he had built with Vanessa, including the relationship itself, which collapsed within weeks once the money ran out and the family's real financial situation became impossible to hide. He testified when Renata's investigation widened into something larger involving the fraudulent legal office, and his cooperation kept him from facing charges of his own, though it did not erase the fact that his signature had once been on paperwork designed to take his father's home. He moved into a small apartment across town, working 2 jobs while he rebuilt what was left of his life, in an echo of the very sacrifice I had made for him decades earlier, though I never once pointed out the symmetry, because some lessons are louder when they are not spoken aloud. It has been 14 months now since that knock on the door. Daniel comes to dinner every Sunday. We do not talk about Vanessa, and we rarely talk about the house, though sometimes I catch him looking at the porch I built when he was 7, running his hand along the railing the way you touch something you almost lost and are still afraid to fully believe you have back. I do not know if I have fully forgiven him. I think forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not a single decision but a long series of smaller ones, made again and again on ordinary Sundays over pot roast and quiet conversation, and I am still somewhere in the middle of that series, moving slowly towards something like peace. What I do know is this: I did not raise my son to become a man who could evict his own father. I raised him to become a man capable of being loved so completely that he mistook it for something he could never lose, no matter what he did with it. That mistake nearly cost us both everything. But it also taught him, in the hardest way possible, that love from a parent is not a bottomless account to be drawn from without consequence. It is a relationship, built and rebuilt daily, and it can survive almost anything except the assumption that it never needs tending at all. If you are a parent who has given everything to a child and felt it repaid with silence, distance, or worse, I want you to hear this clearly: your worth was never measured by their gratitude. It was measured by the fact that you showed up again and again when no one was forcing you to. That does not disappear because someone else failed to see it. And if you are a child who has taken more from a parent than you have ever given back, let this be the story that makes you pick up the phone today, before a knock on a door or an envelope in your hand becomes the only way the truth finally reaches you. There is a part of this story I have not told you yet, and I have saved it for the end because I think it says more about redemption than anything else that happened along the way. 3 weeks after the judge restored the deed to my name, before Daniel and I had spoken more than that one phone call, I drove past the small apartment complex where he was living and saw his car in the parking lot at 6 in the morning. I do not know what made me stop. Curiosity, maybe. The same restless curiosity that had driven me through county records and forged notary registries for weeks. I parked across the street and watched as he walked out in a uniform I did not recognize, climbed into a beat-up sedan that was clearly not the car Vanessa's family had once leased for him, and drove toward the industrial side of town where the warehouses are. I followed him, not proudly, but I did. I told myself it was the same instinct that makes a father check that his son's seatbelt is fastened even when the son is nearly 30 years old. I watched him clock in at a distribution center, the kind of place where you load trucks before the sun comes up and your hands are raw by 9 in the morning. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes, watching my son do the exact kind of work I had done for most of his childhood, and something in my chest that had been clenched tight for months finally loosened, just slightly. He did not know I had seen him. I did not tell him for a long time. But I began driving past that warehouse most mornings, not to spy, but almost as a ritual, a way of quietly witnessing the slow rebuilding of a man I had once feared was lost to me completely. I watched him take a second job in the evenings at a hardware store 2 towns over, the kind of unglamorous work that does not pay much and does not photograph well for anyone trying to impress a girlfriend's wealthy family. There was no more polish in his life. No more Vanessa, no more investment company with a logo and no clients, no more shortcuts. Just early mornings and aching backs and eventually small deposits into a savings account that Renata later told me he had opened specifically to begin repaying what remained of the loan he had unknowingly helped fraudulent lawyers extract using my house as leverage. He never asked me for forgiveness in dramatic terms. He never showed up at my door with flowers or a speech he had rehearsed in his car. Instead, forgiveness arrived the way most real things arrive in life, slowly, through small and repeated actions that eventually add up to something you can trust again. The first Sunday he came to dinner, he brought a toolbox instead of a gift, and without asking, he spent 2 hours fixing the back porch railing that had been loose for years, the same porch he used to run his hand along without saying a word. He did not make it a moment. He simply did it, the way I used to do things for him without expecting to be thanked. And when he was done, he sat down at the table and ate dinner like nothing unusual had happened at all. It took me a long time to understand that this quiet, unremarkable gesture meant more than any apology he could have written. He was not performing contrition. He was demonstrating it in the same currency I had spent his entire childhood teaching him, without ever realizing I was teaching him anything at all. I think often about the stranger's face on that first day, the man in the gray suit who delivered the eviction notice without ever meeting my eyes, The way people avoid eye contact when they know they are the messenger for something unforgivable. I have wondered sometimes whether he ever thinks about the families he serves those envelopes to, whether he carries any of those stories home with him at night, or whether it becomes, after enough years, simply paperwork with an address attached. I have also thought a great deal about Vanessa, though I try not to let bitterness take up permanent residence in my mind when I do. I do not know what happened to her after her family's finances collapsed entirely, after the fraudulent legal office was shut down, and 2 of its associates faced charges that Daniel's testimony helped bring to light. Renata mentioned once, almost in passing, that Vanessa had moved out of state, back to wherever her mother's side of the family still had property untouched by the scandal. I do not wish her particular harm. I simply hope that wherever she is, she eventually learns the difference between people who love you and people who see you as leverage, because I do not think in the end that she ever fully understood which one she had been to my son, or which one he had briefly become to me. What I hold on to now, more than the anger, more than the 4 months of sleeping on my sister's pull-out couch and staring at a stranger's ceiling wondering if I had failed as a father, is this: the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, even when it is buried under forged signatures and shell companies and a knock on a door delivered by a man who would not look me in the eye. It took curiosity to find it, the same curiosity that made me learn to braid hair I did not know how to braid. The same stubborn refusal to accept an easy, comfortable lie simply because the truth would cost more to uncover. Daniel and I are not the same as we were before that Tuesday morning. I do not think we ever will be, and I have made peace with that because some things once broken are not meant to be restored to their exact original shape. They are meant to be rebuilt into something sturdier, something that has been tested and did not fully collapse even when it came close. Last month, on a Sunday that felt like any other Sunday, Daniel asked me almost shyly if I would teach him how to build something with his hands. A bookshelf. Nothing complicated, just something he wanted to make for the small apartment he was slowly turning into an actual home, rather than a temporary stop between disasters. We spent that whole afternoon in the garage, measuring twice and cutting once, the way I had taught him to do everything since he was old enough to hold a hammer without hurting himself. He did not mention the porch. He did not mention the eviction notice, or Vanessa, or the 4 months of silence between us. We simply built something together, the way we used to, before either of us knew that love could be weaponized by people who were never supposed to be near it in the first place. When he left that evening, he hugged me at the door, the way he used to when he was small enough that I could still pick him up off the ground, and he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad, even when I gave you every reason to." I told him the truth, because I think the truth is the only thing worth saying after everything we had been through. I told him that giving up on him had never once crossed my mind as an option, not because he deserved endless patience without consequence, but because I had spent 18 years teaching him what unconditional love looked like in practice, and abandoning that lesson the moment it became difficult would have undone every single year I had spent building it. Love that only survives convenience was never the kind of love I set out to give him in the first place. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I believe there is, it is not simply about eviction notices or forged paperwork or the particular cruelty of watching your own child treat you as an obstacle rather than a father. It is about the quiet, persistent power of refusing to accept the version of events that is handed to you without question. It is about curiosity as an act of love. The willingness to dig for the truth even when the truth might hurt more than comfortable ignorance would. And it is about the slow, unglamorous, deeply unphotogenic work of rebuilding trust one Sunday dinner, one fixed porch railing, one honest conversation at a time. My name is Walter Reeves. I gave my son everything I had for 29 years, and for a brief and devastating season, he gave me an eviction notice in return. But that was not the end of our story, and if you are living through your own version of this right now, I promise you, with everything I have learned the hard way, that it does not have to be the end of yours either. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it moved you, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next story.